Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Stephen Rowley. Looking forward to our conversation today, Stephen.
Me too. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So Stephen is an adoptee. He's also an adopted dad, and you're a psychotherapist as well, right?
I am currently, yes, and but I was in education as a teacher, principal, school district superintendent, 3 college faculties included in that time. So it wasn't until my mid-60s I made the big leap and went back to school and became a psychotherapist then.
Yeah. Wow. So I had this thought about healing that I've been chatting to a couple of people about. Right? So we think about healing; it presumes a wound, right? And the first person to draw attention to this primal wound was Nancy Verrier with a book of that name. And it strikes me that's a third party view, because as an adopted parent, she's an adopted parent, not an adoptee. And do we want to what extent do we want to create our own narrative based on our own kind of terminology and topics? So I guess my first question for you is what do you make of all that and this word?
Well, the awareness of a primal wound, of course, doesn't come until much later life, and frankly, even until I went back to school and did a lot more extensive reading, could I find a more robust language about psychology and psychotherapy, about the nature of psyche, to be able to be more definitive about that. But I think you raised the point about a life narrative. I think that narratives, if they serve us well, change. So, and I've said for families who have adopted children when they're young, the mom and dad ideally will have a narrative for them. It helps explain what adoption was, why they wanted to do that. But then at some point, by their teens and later, that narrative has to be taken over by the child or the young adult. And I think depending on what we find out in terms, if we are looking for our birth parents or more information about our background, or we wrestle with some of the other feelings that may be related to that primal wound as time comes on, then that begins to take a different shape. It has a different narrative. But the narrative itself, and writing a memoir as I did, also is its own form of healing. And it doesn't have to be. So if I ask you, give me 5 minutes to tell me your life story, and I talk to you tomorrow, so give me 5 minutes of your life story, it'd be a little different. Okay. So, and I think that's only natural, but I think that narrative helps us put the pieces together in some kind of more coherent form. And as I say, it changes, but it even in terms of what the role that the wound played, those who have any kind of wound, adoption or not, if they stay with it and only with that, they could end up have a victim mentality and never move past it. Others will have a way to incorporate what they've learned around that, or maybe how the wound itself has served as a guide or an ally, a teacher, if you will, in time. And that changes your narrative considerably about fate and what turned out to be the destiny you were supposed to live that you never had a clue about at the beginning of your life.
Wow. Some big themes there. The first one that popped into my head was actually I was talking to a grandma at the swimming pool whose granddaughter is adopted, and she's 12, and they went to see her last week to take her out, and she said that something had changed. She could sense a change in her granddaughter, and it was actually to do with her granddaughter being shown some details about her birth mother and birth father. And this had lightened the 12-year-old girl's emotional load, I guess. And the grandma, the friend that I know, I've been swimming alongside her for 20 odd years. She says she's obviously tuned in, and she could see and feel the difference in her granddaughter.
Right.
The fact that she was starting to get a little bit more information was being shared with her.
Well, that age group, 12, 13, 14, that's also at the time, adoption notwithstanding, we begin to get something we consider our identity. We become self-aware. Before that, we're just kids and live life. But so it's an interesting juncture for that to happen for that particular time. So it's good to that's a good example of one kind of response that people can have when they get information that sheds more light on who they are and where they came from. It's not always the same reaction by other people. Some people don't want to know, or sometimes that information is not always the most pleasant to hear, and that can do something to throw you off course, so to speak, for a while. But it's a good. I'm glad to hear it's a good story.
Yeah. So does the word healing resonate with you, Stephen?
Well, you and I have talked about this. It does, but I have to say, after really thinking a long time about this, and it's actually my thinking may roll into my next book. I come to the conclusion that healing really is an ineffable. It's the one word that describes what healing is to me: is ineffable. There are dozens, 10 or more primary different modalities of healing that range from physical to psycho-emotional. Marvin Gaye had sexual healing. But I also realized that across most of these modalities, they all have certain elements in common. Ritual is one of them. Oftentimes, although some people can do, quote, self-healing, usually there's a third party. In indigenous tribes, it's a medicine man. In our times, it can be a psychotherapist, or it can be just a good friend who's along to help that healing. So from a Jungian and depth psychological perspective, what that primal wound creates is dissociation. And we respond to dissociation in a couple different ways. One is through aggressiveness, anger, fighting the world. The other is pulling within, being defensive, shutting the door, not letting anybody. Either way, you don't want anybody else to get close to that wound, even if you're not thinking it that way. It's just sort of a defensive reaction. But in time, with that scenario, that dynamic, what healing then means is actually a form of reconnection. It's the opposite of dissociation, it's reconnection. That can be emotionally, it can be psychic. I can get into neurophysiology and what reconnection can mean in terms of how the brain works and so forth. Or it can be in terms of adoption. Sometimes that reconnection, like this is my case, was actual reconnection with my birth mother, who she gave me up on my 10th day, and it wasn't until I was 40 years old that we reunited. We were reconnected, and we were reconnected in a very powerful way. So that's a form of healing.
So when you say disassociation, you mean disassociation from others, or do you mean it?
I would say kind of, it's a good question. It's hard to answer exactly. Yeah, it's a dissociation from others. You're dissociated from life. There's a distance. It's sort of like, somebody who's dissociated may seem like they're not connected to others. They may be a little bit spacey. They may not be very engaged with others, or frankly, sometimes even looking within. It's just sort of, kind of like you got your bell rung and you're kind of, it's not unlike having physical trauma of a concussion. I mean, you're dissociated. Your brain, if you've ever had a concussion before, even a minor one, you realize that something's not quite right. But psychically, that creates that separation from others who we know, who we work with, our loved ones. That wound is deep down in there, and it's well protected. But it means I'm not going to let anybody close to it because I don't want to feel this. I don't want to be hurt this way again.
Yeah.
And we don't think those thoughts often in those particular terms. But I'm sort of trying to give language to what that may mean. And of course, psychically, we can't. We fall short being able to describe what psyche does with our own words. But that's sort of an approximation.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that, is what you're saying that is that it's subconscious that's happening?
Often, certainly in the beginning. I also want to mention, what I was just saying, I'm stealing anybody's ideas I can get my hand on. It's a marvelous book by Dr. Donald Kalsched called Trauma in the Soul. And he outlines in the first chapter, which is a must read for any therapist, but I don't think every therapist reads it, but certainly people in my field have or should. But it's a recitation of how what we do let's say, get this right. His argument, it's not the trauma, it's the response to trauma. So the response is either one of of hypoarousal, being closed off, shuttering ourselves off from the world, or hyperarousal, where we're hyper vigilant, we're pushing people away all the time. Either way, there's two sides of the same coin. So that is inherently the irony is that it's a defensive mechanism. It serves its purpose for keeping us consciously or otherwise being hurt again. Oftentimes, it is unconscious. The problem with it, this is the conundrum of trauma, is that although while we're self-protecting not to get hurt again, we've put ourselves in sort of a glass cage. Now we're kind of trapped. Our little safe little room, our safe house, which protected us, now becomes more like a prison. And so part of the healing process, by whatever means, then begins to lower those barriers, or begins to, let's stay with the metaphor, open the door very slowly, so it becomes safe again to walk in the world again without a fear something bad is going to come our way.
Yeah. So the trauma then is, in some senses, and in some instances, it's blocking us from other people.
Right. There's a visual. I've been actually. There are a lot of other newer technologies, neuroscience tools, where you can actually measure and see what is going on inside the brain, including a traumatized brain. So think of it like like in the old days when cars had carburetors. If your car was not in tune, you had to adjust the carburetor. Otherwise, it's clunking around. It's never hitting all the cylinders. It's making a lot of noise and stuff. Or if you drop your computer or your phone on the ground and it doesn't work, that's dysregulation. It's not regulated, and so that neural dysregulation is in fact the antecedent. It's underlying. It's under the hood of emotional dysregulation. So if you find somebody who's emotionally dysregulated, for example, if you're stuck in hiding from the world for the rest of your life, that's a form of emotional dysregulation. Or if your moods are going up and down without any control, that's a form of emotional dysregulation. But the corollary to that, you can actually see and measure through different scientific techniques. You actually see that the antecedents are in fact physical. They're physical, with brain waves and other parts of the brain that are or not in tune with one another, either overstimulated or understimulated, or even disconnect. I mean, that's the neuroscience terminology in a rough sort of way, but you get my point. I think that there's that this isn't just strictly the trauma isn't strictly psychological, if you know what I mean. So we examine, people like me look at the psychological end of these things, or in my own case, examine my own life through writing a memoir and so forth. But I've gone through this myself, but we have to realize that if the cases are severe in terms of the trauma, and medication is only, for example, only helping quell some of the symptoms, that will not cure or create actual healing. Things like neurofeedback, as an example, has a much greater potential to actually heal by actually restoring neural regulation in the brain.
Yeah. So, sorry, listeners, I left off the fact that Stephen is an author, as well as being an adopted parent and a psychotherapist. He's an author, and that's one of the things that we're going to be, I guess, we're talking about today. And there's links in the show notes. Every time we do an episode, there's links in the show notes so that people could find more about the guest. Check out the website, check out the book if they've got one, as Stephen has. So I think if I remember something from looking at your website, our conversation that we had last time, is that as well as this kind of hard edge, the Jungian stuff, you've also explored some Eastern ideas as well. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. I can't say that I'm a card-carrying Buddhist. I'm not sure most Buddhists carry cards anyway, but I've been tremendous influences. There's one of the chapters in my book is called Sharon Stone, the Dalai Lama, and Me, and that came out of a 3-day teaching I was with the Dalai Lama. Then I was in a private reception with him, and Sharon Stone happened to be there. It's pretty. I think it's a fairly funny chapter in the book. But then also I've had there's a number of other different Buddhist lamas who I've been involved with. There's another chapter. I played golf with a Buddhist lama in Carmel Valley one time. But the thing, the Suzuki Roshi, the beginner's mind, I think is a almost a central precept from in terms of what I'd call Zen approach to therapy and how we begin to understand the mind and begin to have a self-awareness of the mind. So when our thoughts are running away from us, we don't just jump on and cling to them. We learn how to let go and be able to just watch what the mind does. So the end of my book, the book comes from a Zen koan, which is it isn't really, but it's like a puzzle. Like the most common one is what's the sound of one hand clapping. It's kind of hackneyed by now, but it's almost a trope. But in my case, I had as I was trying to get the ending of the book, the last 3 weeks, I had one more chapter to go, and I just couldn't get it. And I had the Zen koan on my computer, and that was the coin lost in the river is found in the river. The coin lost in the river is found in the river. Now, certain Zen traditions, lineages, will take a koan like that and give it to the student, and they have to stay with it for a month. And you do that every month for 2 years. So you get 24 major league koans you're asked to wrestle with. You go back to the teacher and say, is this the answer? They go, no, try again. And so at some point you realize these are not puzzles to be solved, but there are tools by which we begin to examine the mind and how the mind works. So in this particular case, if you take it literal, if you drop a coin into a river and you look down in the water, you go, well, I can see where it is. But of course, refraction of light, it isn't where you think it is. And of course, if you drop a coin into muddy water, you don't have a clue where it is. So there's that element to me that the koan, in terms of my own my memoir, elicits the idea of mystery in life. We don't quite know how the things in my particular case, why was I so lucky in life? Was I lost all the time? Did I find myself? Have I still found myself? I'm not so sure. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And that's that another, using that word again, ineffable, a certain element of mystery. So a lot of people's narratives, a lot of people's memoirs, as an example, race to a kind of a stunning conclusion, a resolution to the problem. And for me, anyway, I can only say that I found that less satisfying than to keep the door open with some of the mystery of life. I mean, why do the things happen to us as they do? I mean, we can have some kind of causal explanation, but why did I end up with the parents that I had when I was adopted? Why did I meet my wife when I did? Why did our 4-year little boy come to our house on a certain day? And my wife and I were devoutly, because we were both in education, surrounded by kids, like, we don't want kids at home. We see them all the time at school. Why would we want a kid? He walked in the door. We fell in love. He did with us. And why did that happen? I can only say that's the hand of fate right there. And I take it as that kind of a powerful, ineffable, and mysterious element that's in our lives the more we examine them.
Yeah. There's loads there. The first thought that came to me is, the word wonder, and we say wonderful, but
Mhm.
but are we wonderful? Are we full of wonder, or are we desperate to get the
Yeah,
answer?
yeah. And I'd say it's an acquired taste, the way that curiosity is. People like me, I think, by my nature, I'm curious, maybe even snoopy, but curious for sure. That's why I think I went into psychotherapy, because there's so much to know and to try to learn that we can't possibly know. In fact, here's one of the mysteries: the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know. So there's a conundrum right there. But I think that the sense of wonder, the sense of curiosity, that's like I say, an acquired taste. And I think it's not for everybody. Some people don't, in terms of birth parents. Some people don't want to know who their parents are. They could care less. Other people like me spent my life looking for them, and so that's just who I am. But the more I talk to people at different engagements and so forth, the more I hear that. I mean, I hear that quality of wanting reconnection, sometimes the ecstasy of finding a birth parent, sometimes the enormous disappointment of not finding one, and in some cases the utter surprise. I've got a client right now who I think is it's quite clear that he's a very close blood relation to the former drug czar Pablo Escobar in Colombia. South America. Well, there were reasons of his own story. That's somebody, well, he's not alive anymore. You don't want to meet that family because they don't want to see you. You know what I mean? So sometimes it's like you got, sometimes that the university says, no, you cannot do this. You should not do this. So that's again a disappointment, but we're left going, well, how come? Or why don't I get to do that? Or why did I get to do that? So we're all over the map with those big questions, but they're, to me, they fuel a deeper a deeper yearning to know more about these ineffable qualities of what life is composed. And I think in that way, that primal wound we referred to earlier, and the separation of mother and child, that sense of yearning, sense of wanting to be connected. There were times I'm sure I felt really miserable with it and frustrated, but in the long run, I realized that has been a primary teacher. My life would not be what it is today without not only the circumstances of my upbringing by my parents, but also that other inner psychological dynamic that keeps me curious, keeps me wanting to know, keeps me a little off balance sometimes, keeps me, I've turned into a polymath in my old age because I'm so interested in so many things. And that's why, I chose at age, well, I'm just turned 75. So, and I've got another one in the hopper. And it's because that's who I am. I mean, other people are like, forget it, you're supposed to be retired. And it's, well, I don't think I would be this way if I didn't have that strong emotional dynamic, both unconscious much of the time, and then later it came to consciousness more. So I can do nothing but say I wouldn't want to have it any other way.
Yeah. I knew this was going to be a fantastic conversation. Two things I see from this, two things, and perhaps ends of the same spectrum. On one hand, we've got the mystery of healing, and on the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum, we've got the frustration. I just want to heal, right? So that's how I see it, and that's just literally just popped into my head. So how do you see those two things, like the mystery and frustration, or do you see mystery and impatience, or do you see, how do you have a go at that?
Yeah, I'm going to pull up a quote that I think is a marvelous quote by James Hillman, who succeeded Carl Jung at the Jung Institute in Zurich. Now, it isn't quite the same. He uses using the word depression, but depression, let's say the depression out of the frustration of not knowing, of running into brick walls. So here's his quote. This is from his famous book, Revisioning Psychology. Depression is essential to the tragic sense of life. It moistens the dry soul and dries the wet. It brings refuge, limitation, focus, gravity, weight, and humble powerlessness. It reminds of death. The true revolution begins in the individual who can be true to his or her depression, neither jerking oneself out of it, caught in cycles of hope and despair, nor suffering through it till it turns, nor theologizing it, but discovering the consciousness and depth it wants. Discovering the consciousness and depth it wants. So begins the revolution on behalf of the soul. So you see how he takes, when I have clients talk about depression could be related to adoption or not, there's something in the depths of that despair that Hillman is directing our awareness to, saying that awareness brings, it's not that what we're bringing to it, it's what it's bringing to us. So sometimes, like we say in these cases of mystery, or maybe when we do or do not find our birth parents, it's bringing something to us. Sometimes we can't think that we're masters of our lives and we're going to go out and conquer and find out everything we do. We're going to heal ourselves. Sometimes they come to us in very mysterious ways at very odd times. Sometimes the ways they come to us can be painful and tragic, and we wonder, well, I didn't deserve that. Which is a quote in my book by a Zen priest: everybody gets what they deserve, whether they deserve it or not. I love that. I mean, that happens to us all. We're going to get it whenever it comes. But his thing is that with depression, so begins the revolution on behalf of the soul. What's the revolution of the soul on behalf of the soul? What purpose does the depression serve? So that's in therapy, but in my own life and by writing this book, it takes some time to dig down into where is this coming from? What are the themes? What are the people? What are the incidents that I'm depressed about? Plenty of people I know who have searched for birth parents the better part of their lives and had no success, forever frustrated, and they're depressed. All I want to know is who I am. Who are my mom? Who is my dad? Where do I get my birth certificate? I've been there and done that, so I know what that feels like. But the impetus behind that depression is coming, I think, from some other deeper spark down. This is where depth psychology and other kinds of philosophy come in. But that if we're patient enough with ourselves to allow this revolution, this revelation as well, come to us, this waiting for an answer or waiting for life to come to in its own way, I think is a form of spiritual maturity. That patient, because we're so, I'm short, I have a short attention span anyway. But, let's get the answer. Let's get something done. I want an answer. Let's go do things. And when life says no, that's not happening. That's not happening. So as your young friend at 12 years old, she finds out something at 12. I've thought, what if I would have found out when I started looking that all of the records for my birth parents were handed to me? What would I have done? What would have happened to them? They were both alive at that time. I can't imagine what a train wreck that probably would have been for everybody. Instead, I had to wait till I was 40 and my birth mother a little over 60 to find each other, which was exactly the right time. And then I never did meet my birth father. The book ends with that. It was just about 2 years ago that I got contacted by 23andMe. He'd been dead since 1985. And one of my new half sisters said, "It's a good thing you never met him. You would have never gotten along." You're complete opposite, except for the athletic ability. You're like, you would have been at loggerheads. So I dodged a bullet in that one. So
Yeah.
I'm a little off course, but I think that's coming back into why we take life circumstances, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and begin to make, if we want to, make them into something in terms of raising our consciousness. And we do so by curiosity, by persistence, by looking for other signs in the world that are telling us something. That's, I think, that what Hillman refers to, that revolution on behalf of the soul. That's where I think that's for some people, maybe many people, what does it mean to be in touch with soul? What is soul? It's another word like healing. It's ineffable. But still, there's that something we understand about our nature, I think, if we are mature enough and patient enough to really understand, to be in touch with those higher powers that are both, whether they're inside, outside, or both. Yeah. Take your pick.
So the thing that's popping into my head is, I think you used the word diving in the depression when you were reading the quote. So in that instance, we're talking about diving into the depression. In our case as adoptees, perhaps we're talking about diving into the wound or exploring the wound.
Right.
And obviously the exploration is fueled by our curiosity, right? So the curiosity is so we're exploring the wound rather than trying to push it away, right?
Right.
So we hear so much about the number of adoptees in addiction, right? And I've had Pamela Karen over on the show talking about her, the end of her 27-year-old relationship with alcohol was when she, the pivotal moment was when she realized that facing her feelings or exploring her wound was time to do that rather than numbing out through the booze.
Right.
So exploration and numbing out or suppressing or stuffing or anything like that seems to, it's kind of, is it about us going through the barrier rather than
Right,
being stopped by it. I don't know.
right. Yeah, it's coming out of the use a telemetaphor. How some people can persevere and come out of the dark night of the soul. Because when you're in there with addiction, as an example, or other kinds of trauma, you're in no man's land. You know where you left. You think you're headed in a direction that you want to be. Like if you thought I left this piece of the mainland, I want to get to another continent or another island to be safe on. You don't know whether you're 5 feet away or 500 yards away or 500 miles. You just don't. That's why guides, either in terms of psychotherapists, although sometimes you can do it solo, like the woman you mentioned, or as I mentioned in my book, shamanism is a particularly suited to this. There's a book in this country named Sandra Ingerman called Soul Retrieval. It's a certain kind of shamanism. I'm seeing this same woman today, actually. Now they have a way of literally go. You don't have to do much of anything as the recipient of it. You basically they go down into you after some different ritual exercises and so forth. But they can go down and find those places where those wounds exist, where those shattered pieces are. And as I mentioned in my book, it was a source of a healing, if you will, since we're using that word today, of a rift that I had from my mother from the time that she yelled at me when I was 13 and said I wanted to know more about my adoption. And she said, "What's the matter with you? What's wrong? Don't you think we love you enough?" And then I ran out of the room, slammed the door, and swore I would never talk to her about my adoption again. And I didn't, much to my embarrassment today, but I never did until I had the session, until I was able to go down, find those wounds again. And also, I have my shaman friend, shamanistic healer, tell me more about my own my mom I grew up with. Totally changed my life, totally set my head completely differently. She was 100 years old at the time this event happened, and a year later she died, but I saw her before she died, and she burst into tears when she saw me. This is about 2 months after the session. I'd never seen her cry. Bursts into tears, grabs my hand, and just shakes. And I knew what was going on. It was as though I had gone down with my friend, the shaman, into this form of healing. I had completely found her as she really was, more as the student with me as the teacher in this life. And I think she got it. Somehow that got to her in some ways that I can't possibly rationally defend or explain, but I'm quite sure it's true. So, but that going down deep, there's lots of ways to go down deep by definition, depth psychology. You go down deep. Dreams are a marvelous way to learn how to go down deep. You're getting dreams all the time. They're coming from down there. And what they mean and what images come with them, that's a podcast for another show. But surely, as Freud said, it's the royal road. Dreams are the royal road to the unconscious.
Yeah.
So all those things, whether it's the creative impulse, the where our wounds are stored, where our talents are stored in some ways, where we have what Hillman would call the bud of the acorn, our predestined self in its way of expanding and exploring its own destiny as we get older. That's coming from someplace. We look at the oak tree and kind of go, you might have been an acorn one day. You don't look like an acorn today. You're programming this from a long time ago, and you're just tiny like this. So we see that. So I think those are all those marvelous ways we can look at how we become who we are, and what role that certainly our parentage, of course, but also the wounds we acquire, particularly when you're young. Not only just adoption and that type of primal wound, but I use the word. It comes from Winnicott, the British psychoanalyst. Primitive agonies. Primitive agony to me is like something even deeper. Primitive agony, I think, is what something that's so deep within our individual and collective psyches that it defies description. But they have to do with terror, fear of abandonment. As an example, would be a primitive agony, left alone. I interviewed students who want to go to Stanford. So I got my PhD there. And this young lady who's absolutely gorgeous young woman, she was Chinese in terms of her nationality, but she was left in a box at 6 months old at a train station in remote Mongolia. Left. Now talk about a primitive agony. I mean, and of course, then she got adopted, and then she by her parents here, and she turned out to be. She said, "Well, I want to either be a brain surgeon or major in fashion or both." So she had that kind of level of talent. But talk about the hands of fate that delivered you from that obscure, wretched beginning into. I think didn't go to Stanford. She went to Dartmouth. But anyway, that would leave your mouth hanging open, like, by the grace of God, by the grace of some power, look where you ended up.
Yeah.
Just it's beyond the word luck. I use it in my book. I use the word both fate. Well, adoption and destiny. There's something about destiny in this. Something about how these events, our traumas, play a role in taking us to our ultimate destiny. If we're lucky, if we have support, because if we don't, oftentimes those traumas can leave us severely damaged. We have a president of this country whose horrible father, the guy was traumatized from the day he was born. Look what happened. You see those pictures of and putting these two together. Let's just let that stand anyway. You look at what happened to Adolf Hitler when he was, young, and how he turned out. I mean, you're talking about impact to children who, I'm well, arguably say, I think we'd all say, are born innocent, so to speak. They're not born evil, and yet by that kind of trauma can really distort, at their extremes, horrible people. And what's that also is the hand of fate. How did that happen? I mean, not everybody who had horrible parents turned into Hitler, but or Trump, but it does happen to some. And why some and why others? We don't know.
Yeah. So, do you think we take a too narrow approach to healing modalities?
It's a good question. I don't. I think those who have expertise in some of those areas I mentioned before, traditional, alternative medicine, body work, nutritional stuff, herbal stuff, other things called holistic plant medicine. I mean, what I call it my problem. What maybe irk is a little too strong, but what I get a little frustrated with is the kind of myopia for people who are only in that lane. It's only in that, I can only see the world, or in terms of my particular specialty, rather than having a much broader perspective where you can see your own talent, especially lie in that. There's that old joke, it's a Buddhist joke, about the pickpocket who meets the Dalai Lama, and when he does, all he can see is his pockets. So you've got that element that sometimes we only see what we are looking for. So when you do run into people who have much more broader curiosity, a multifaceted sort of sense of what they are. Now, I may have to stay in my own lane with what I know I can do, but it doesn't mean I can't really appreciate, for example, what acupuncture does. I've had it, but I couldn't do it. But I know what its capacity is, as an example. And I also know that if I have a broken arm, I probably don't want to go see I don't, as a Western guy, I don't want to probably go see the acupuncturist. I want to go see a regular orthopedic guy and set my broken arm. You know what I mean? So sometimes it's okay to fall back on orthodox methodologies where they work and stay with it. So, yeah, I think so. Those are, but it seems as though there's always for commercial reasons and other reasons, these fields seem to, like, they expand all the time. There's a new variation of this or that. I mean, I'm sure you have, since it's an interest to you, but all the things, journals I get, books I read, things that come online, listservs I'm on, book lists about the newest. What would I get the other way? It's in the other room. 30 steps to 30 steps to becoming more authentic.
Yeah.
Fine. I don't think I'm going to sit down and read the book and become, even though there's exercise and stuff. And to some people, it's probably really right for them, but it just seemed like this is such low hanging fruit that it doesn't really, for I think more mature adults, it doesn't really. Something happens in my world, and I think for others in their areas, have to grab you, and maybe you do become a true believer, and that's okay. I mean, I have things I don't want to give up in terms of what I believe and what I know works, and And I don't feel I need to go looking to some other specialty. But like I say, in time, I've dabbled a lot in different kinds of therapies and different body work kind of things. And my friend Michelle, who does shamanistic healing, I've seen her, I don't know, 7 or 8 times. Every time, it's a marvel what happens. And I'm just sitting there. She does all the work, comes back up and tells me what she's seen and what she's done while she's down there. And it's not like I feel radically different, but a few weeks later, a month later, it's like, yeah, something shifted. Or like the word you used for the 12-year-old, something lightened up, something as though it either got left behind or it re-healed itself. There was some other kind of integration. I mean, that's what Rolfing as a body type of work, or structural integration, reintegrates a twisted body. There's a methodology to that, but you're reintegrating. I think that's why another word for what happens with psychotherapy, or this idea of reconnection, is in fact is a form of integration. It doesn't mean in perfectly symmetrical shape. It just means that whatever shape you were meant to be. I mean, so you might end up, your perfectly symmetrical self might look like a Picasso, cubist painting with 3 eyes and arms coming out of your head. And you know what I mean? It's like, and for some people, that's the way they are, and that's they've self-actualized, to use Maslow's thing. That's who they are. So may not be my cup of tea, but it doesn't really matter what I think. I mean, that's that kind of how we find ourselves glued together. And for some people who have endured an enormous amount of psychological stress and trauma and terror in their lives, they're probably just happy to have the glue holding together. You know what I mean? I'm living a life. People say who struggle with schizophrenia live a life, or people who are living on methadone are living a life. It may not be the ideal life, but you're living it. You've pulled together enough to make it work.
Yeah. So you said a phrase a couple of minutes ago that really struck me, and I scribbled it down. You said setting your head differently. Use this phrase, setting your head differently.
Stucking?
No,
I said that.
Setting. So you said something like something happened and it set my head differently. So to me, like it was like an insight. You had you had an insight.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like I maybe when I was talking about my event with my mother, it did totally change my head. And that's a dramatic way, very emotional way. But there are other things I mentioned in the book that were more studied and more subtle, but it's still the same thing. At Stanford, I worked with, took a couple of courses with Jim March, who anybody who's gone to Stanford at that era will, in the 80s, and will know exactly who he is. He taught a course on leadership by teaching Don Quixote. And he actually made a film of it, went to Spain, where Cervantes lived and so forth. You think, wait, that's crazy. Like, he was a delusional fool. He was like this dusty old knight who didn't know, Dulcinea thought was the most beautiful woman in the world. Thought he saw armies and just sheep and so forth. But what changed my mind in Jim's class, among other things, was that the way he taught it was that and it's in Spanish it's yo sé quién soy. I know who I am. So despite all the humiliation and degradation that came from other society for being this old gas bag, out in the countryside in Sancho Panza, he knew who he was, and what in today's terminology, we would call it a champion for social justice. That was his romantic ideal. That was chivalry in his part. So he knew who he was. He was not going to be budged. And I think that's why it was a mind changer for me, because you take a counterintuitive example of a leader, mostly we think of heroics and all this stuff, enormous mental and physical powers and so forth. And here you've got a guy who just defies description, and yet he becomes, in his heart, I know who I am. And so that I think is one of those challenging kind of ideas that should spur us on to say, do we know who we are? Well, in some ways, yes. Do I know myself today that I did 10 years ago? I don't think so. Better or worse, I don't know, but different. But there's something it resonates with me as a core self-understanding.
Okay.
I know who I am.
So
It could be one's place in the world, what I do for a living, or what I do when I'm not making a living, or how I conduct myself, or what causes I believe in, and so forth. That I know who I am. That's where it's a powerful. So that's that example of more of a subtle. But I like those. That's kind of a Jungian concept of synchronicity, when suddenly your idea of what you thought was changed. In the book, I talk about meeting friends of mine were camping in Western Colorado. We picked up a hitchhiker, a guy our age, and when he left us the next day, he gave me some yarrow sticks and said, "Do you know what these are?" I said, "No." He goes, "Well, have you ever heard of the I Ching?" And I go, "Well, yeah." He says, these sticks are yours as a thank you for the evening. Go to the bookstore in Boulder, Colorado, buy the book of Changes, I Ching, by Wilhelm, and take these and roll one and see what happens. So I did. Ironically, I put it in the book. My friends and I were staying at the former home of Robert Oppenheimer, of all people. So I did this thing, like what you do with the yarrow sticks, and I came up with the number 50, the cauldron, which really, really spoke to me about what had happened the evening before, and it helped really change my mind where I was going in life. And soon after, I came back to Seattle, quit being stoned all the time in Colorado, and came back and became a teacher eventually. But what was more uncanny was that as I was thumbing through the book, marveling at just what I had learned, I noticed there was an introduction to the book. It was by Carl Jung, which was like, I knew something about Jung. He's in part of a thesis I wrote for my undergrad years in psychology. But then as I was reading it, he talked about his first time with the yarrow sticks. And what do you think he got? Same as me, or I got the same as him. Number 50, the cauldron.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just spine tingling. It was like, holy cow. So that's a good example of synchronicity. That's not a book reading. That's a lived experience, and kind of like, well, what does that reveal? What synchronicity means? It's as though you're parting the veil on our own rationality, our explanations for the world, how it works, and then we get a glimpse of what's going on. It's asynchronous. It's another, we can only understand it through intuition, not through our own thinking. Yeah. And that was at the time was a revelation. I think today still, I find myself, even as I'm writing again right now, I really have to sleep on some things to wake up and kind of wait for that deeper from the dream world, the unconscious, something I wake up and go, oh yeah, that's what I was looking for. I can't make it happen. I can't think my way through it. I have to rely on something coming from below to shed a little light and kind of give you those aha moments, like, oh yeah.
So interesting. Talk about making it happen. I often came up with this a while ago. Like we can't make healing happen. But we can hang out. We can hang out at the bus stop. So what I used the word insight. You used a changing in your head. You also said changed my mind. Like to me, healing moments are those moments when our mind changes, but we don't make that happen. Something else does.
Right. I'm trying to pull this quote up. It's in my on my website. Hold on. Yeah, I think, and sometimes I hate using the word because it has all kinds of political connotations with it anymore. To be woke or to wake up. But what that means is that we begin to pay attention. That's not a very fancy word. That doesn't have a lot of, esoteric, Christmas bulbs lying out. So this is on my website from Ajay Shanti, who is a spiritual teacher here, known throughout the world. And his quote that I think it really says a lot about what we're talking about. It says, "Pay attention to what life is trying to reveal to you. Say yes to its fierce, ruthless, and loving grace." Just in itself, pay attention to what life is trying to reveal to you. I mean, that's a big question. What's it trying to reveal to me? What is it trying to reveal to me? And then the topper is say yes to its fierce, ruthless, and loving grace. Well, loving grace is a great thing. It's like the big birthday package. It's like, oh yeah, loving grace, grace from God. How cool, great, wonderful. But the other two are fierce and ruthless. Where you're going to get your ass kicked. It's going to be like it's going to waterboard you emotionally, where you don't know where the next breath is going to come from, where you are in a dark place, and people go, "That's not a place of grace." Well, if you're not paying attention to what it's trying to reveal to you, you're right. Then you're really trapped. You're trapped in the water. You're going to drown. But if you're paying attention, it's like the Hillman quote. If you're paying attention to what it's trying to tell you when things get rough, we understand. Oh yeah, this ultimately is a moment of grace in terms of my own understanding what this taught me, what this brought to me that I was otherwise uh, removed from. So that kind of paying attention to the world is a what life is trying to reveal is it's much more of a prosaic way of talking about enlightenment and higher levels of consciousness, all that stuff, which all have its place. But I'm a little bit more drawn to stuff that are relatable to every person. Pay attention to what life is trying to reveal to you.
Yeah.
When your car breaks down on the road at the side of the highway, you're swearing like, oh God, I'm stuck. It's the night. The car. It's like, well, what's life trying to reveal to you? Well, life's trying to reveal to you that you're a knucklehead and you didn't take care of your car in the first place. Is what it's trying to tell you.
Yeah.
You know, or that it will reveal to you by the end of the night you're actually much more resilient than you ever thought you would be. You'll find a way to flag somebody down or get some gas or whatever you need, and you're on your way. So those are little moments, but they're sometimes they can be sometimes a little unpleasant, but reminders nevertheless, ones we need to have come our way.
Yeah. And so often it takes a challenge to change our mind.
Yeah, I think it does. That's that. Again, back to your thing about Buddhism, Dalai Lama's thing is that that adversity is our greatest teacher.
Yeah.
How else would we learn?
How else would we?
But if we don't fail, we're just not going to learn. Or some other form of frustration with it, whatever. So yeah, a challenge for sure.
Yeah. I was going to ask you a question, but that feels like a really good spot to bring this one in, and I'm sure we can dive into another one sometime soon.
Be happy to do that. It's fun talking with you.
Yeah.
You have a good question. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I knew it was going to be a fascinating conversation. Anybody that's into the Dalai Lama and Jung is going to be, you know what I mean? Like, you use the word polymath, and I, as you said that, and you talked about medicine, I heard something recently about it in physical medicine that there's a massive drive for specialization, and so polymathing is multi-skilling and specialization, and the further people are driven by this need to specialize further and further, but they go deeper and deeper in just one area, and they lose touch with the rest of what's going on.
Right. Well, educational systems are major culprits and all that. And all as I say, I interview high schoolers who applied to Stanford, and most of them are really bright kids. By definition, they wouldn't be applying to go to Stanford if they didn't. But they're already in that loop. Washington Post called it that they're being branded by the time they're in middle school. You want to be a doctor? Okay, decide now, and then we're going to build everything else around you, your resume around that one thing. Instead of saying, what? As I had one kid who got into Stanford said, and I asked him, what do you think you want to major? He goes, I have no idea. That's why I'm going, which I thought was a great answer. And he got in. So we need to be more disciplined about not exacting fealty to certain disciplines, if you know what I mean. So
yeah, and I think there's a loop back there to the breadth of our the breadth of our healing approach, right? So for me, I think that Kirsten Nancy Verrier wrote The Primal Wound, and I read the follow-up book as well. And it seems like in the first book, right, she talks about I said I was going to bring this in, but anyway, we're off again. In the first book, she talks about the primal wound being a wound to our, like psychology, spirits. When it's really broad, and yet her healing book seemed to me to be totally about psychology.
Mm.
So she identified a broad problem, and then the book that she wrote to ostensibly to fix a broad problem was itself very narrow. That's just my opinion, and yet I think that in the same way you talked about the education system setting up for specialization, we our healing strategies aren't as diverse as they could be. Is kind of,
yeah, it's like therapists who are specialists in cognitive behavioral therapy. They're the hammer, and everybody that comes in is the nail. This is what you need because it's what I've got. Or it's the old joke about surgery. That's what they do. They cut people. I mean, if you got a good one, they'll say you don't need it. And that's good, but that's what they do. So, but that narrowness, it can be. Well, if I need have a brain tumor removed, I want to have a surgeon who's damn good at it. Okay, so I don't want a polymath for a brain surgeon or a airline pilot. I want somebody who's really schooled in that particular discipline. But in terms of becoming a learner in this life and having the aptitude and energy and curiosity to expand, it's nothing but an invitation to expand our interests and let them take us where they will. I mean, I have a whole. I listen to most of my books I read I actually listen to on audible.com. And so when I look back at the ones they're all over the place. I'm just got through with the David Sedaris book, and now I'm listening back to the short stories of Ernest Hemingway. It's sort of like that. So
yeah.
And another one I recently listened to was Black Elm Speaks, which is a marvelous book. So anyway.
Thanks a lot, Stephen. And I'm going on holiday in next month, and I'm going to be downloading you. So I'm all right in thinking you haven't got an Audible of your book. Is that right? Have you done
Say it again?
Have you done an audio version of your book yet?
No.
No, not yet. So I'm going to be downloading the Kindle version, and I'm interested in especially in the Sharon Stone bit. And I was going to ask a rude question around that, but that's for a different time. Right. Thanks.
I never laid a hand on her. I never laid a hand on her. No. But when you're with this tape or whatever, this stuff, you send that to PJ, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, will do. Take care.
Great.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Okay.
Bye, sisters.
Bye-bye.